this year, 2023, and next year, we're going to have relatively low growth numbers to start with. So this year in particular, 2.9%, this is not a super high number. But you're right that this has been revised upwards. And this is the first time in quite a while that we've had sort of good news in that sense.
Are you surprised that after so many interest rate hikes with such ferocity and speed that the economies are withstanding the shock of the monetary tightening? I mean, to have this level of tightening and still be registering this sort of growth is remarkable.
The economy has been very resilient, not just in the U.S., also in other parts of the world, including the European economies. Many of them have been quite resilient. And you're right. So there's been this massive tightening. Now, why has it been so resilient? Was one point is, I've already mentioned, the labor market. We're coming out of the pandemic and the crisis of the last 2 years, and there is an enormous demand for labor. And that some of that demand is not yet met in the U.S., for instance. We still have very elevated levels of vacancies. And then on top of that, households have accumulated a lot of savings through these last 2 years, thanks to policy and also thanks to the precautionary behavior. And they're looking to spend some of that. So that's supporting the economy.
Inflation is off the boil. I think you have the number in here. 84% of countries are expected to have lower headline inflation this year than last. So inflation has peaked, but are the current policies sufficient to bring inflation down, in most cases, to the target 2%?
Well, that's the second bit of good news in the sense that we're seeing inflation starting to sort of move in the right direction. So growth is expected to bottom out. Inflation is coming down. This year could be the year of the turning point, and we're sort of holding our breath for this. Now, is it enough? Headline inflation is coming down in large part because energy prices have been coming down in the last few months. Core inflation, which exclude energy and food prices, has been more sticky. It's been coming down in the U.S., but certainly not in other parts of the world. And it's still very elevated. We're far from levels that would be consistent with central bank targets. So here, there is a need to sort of stay the course for central banks. It's not yet time to declare victory and go home. There is a need to sort of maintain tight monetary policy conditions to make sure we get on a path towards a sustained reduction in the inflation rate throughout the year and into next year.
It's not hitting us yet, but it will hit us probably Q3, maybe Q4 into next year. And that is, once we've got inflation down to 3.5%, 4%, even 3%, do central banks say, well, I think we've done here. We don't need to worry too much about getting down to the last 2%?
Well, I think what you're asking is whether they should adjust the central bank targets. And I think that's not a discussion any central bank wants to have right now. I mean, they're engaged in this fight. It's very important. They have a lot of their reputation at stake here. This is their job to keep price stable. And I think it would be a little bit odd to sort of declare victory by just moving the goalposts. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to see central banks that really aim to bring it back down to 2% where it should be.
China reopened. Seems to now take the hit in terms of COVID. I would expect, and correct me, that by mid to late this year, China, assuming COVID doesn't really knock it over, will start to make a decent contribution to global growth.
Yes, we absolutely agree on this. I mean, the 2022 was a tough year for the Chinese economy, in part because of the zero COVID policies, the episodes of confinements and lockdowns, and also the troubles in the property sector. Their sudden reopening towards the end of last year, it's paving the way for a very rapid rebound in Chinese growth, which we anticipate in the course of this year. We are projecting China's growth at 5.2% for 2023. And just to give you a sense of that number, China and India is expected to also do quite well in 2023. Both of them together, that accounts for about half of the global growth.